Welcome to another episode of PATHOS. My name is Colbert B. Williams Sr. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a certified anger management facilitator. Today we will be continuing our discussion on fears. Let me again remind all of you of our PATHOS/life mantra, and that mantra is insight, awareness, and exercising appropriate judgment, meaning making appropriate choices and decisions. Continuing on with our definition from our previous episode of what fear is, again, it's a distressed emotion aroused by impending signals. These signals are many times identified as dangers, whether this threat is real or imagined, and these imagined or real threats, we call them perceptions and intuitions. These are commonly referred to as gut feelings, the feelings of being conditioned or a condition of being afraid. So I want to move on with back to some of the fears of love that I didn't talk about in our last episode. Fear of hate. And many times let me share with you, there's a song back in the early days of the 60s and 70s was called There's a Thin Line Between Love and Hate. And many times that fear of love is one's fear of not experiencing hate, which is a very, very powerful emotion. You've seen, if you can go to the halls of some of the family law courts, you hear people saying it's a commonly statement that, I hate you. And how did you go from I love you to I hate you? And it's a very, very powerful statement that kind of hits you right in the heart when somebody tells you that they hate you. So many times people shy away from love because of that fear of hate. Fear of truth and reality. And again, this is the fear of love of, what are the truths and realities when it comes to love? We talked about this issue of, or dynamic of change. And these are some of the truths, these are some of the realities of who we are and being able to accept others unconditionally for who they are. These are some of the truths and realities in our lives, in the nature in and of itself. Moving on to fear of commitment. This is a review of another dynamic is fear of restriction. Sometimes when people commit, they feel very put into a box, if you will, being restricted to be who they are, to be in that free spirit. And so many times talking about fears of commitment, again, we talk about, am I able to be who I am unconditionally? So that's many times that feeling of being restricted is like being put inside that box. So let's move on in talking about some more fears. And we'll be exploring fears of risk. And these are, again, another very powerful dynamic. Fear of failure. Wow. That taking that risk of whatever it may be it a career, be it a project, be it doing something different. What if I fail? And this keeps people locked in to many things of not wanting to try things. Fear of success. And again, fear of risk that, why would people be afraid of success? Well, that fear of failure and the contradiction or the counterpoint to that would be fear of success. Why wouldn't one be afraid of success? Well, as one could be afraid of failure, one could also be afraid of success. So these are very, very interesting dynamics to explore when we're on that journey. And remember that mantra, that insight and awareness. Who are we at very in-depth levels? Fear of death. This is a very, very powerful dynamic. Those risks. I ride Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and sometimes in the beginning of the show, you'll see a clip of me on my bike. That fear of death. Colbert, you may kill yourself on the motorcycle. So many times people will not do things that bring them pleasure because they have this fear of death. Flying, people sometimes don't fly on airplanes because they have this fear of death. So many times people do not do a lot of things in life because of fear of death. So we can talk about this particular dynamic in depth at length. That's probably not prohibitive for this particular episode, but we'll come back to that later. Fear of danger. This is, again, that risk taking. Whether you're riding motorcycles, flying an airplane, doing extreme sports, bungee jumping, many different fears. And sometimes people have encountered and confronted their fears, and you say, well, why and how can people do that? Well, sometimes they become one with nature and one with that dynamic of danger, and it doesn't present an issue for them. But again, risk, that fear of risk, that fear of danger, fear of reality. Again, that risk taking is part of, like in business. Why do people go into business, or you are entrepreneurs? If you're an entrepreneur, you're usually a risk taker. That's kind of one of the realities of entrepreneurship. Fear of death is fear of life. Now we're on to another dynamic when we're talking about fear of death. Many times people are afraid to even talk about death, and this sounds like a very counterpoint or a contradiction, but not talking about or not really wanting to embrace one's mortality is having that fear of death, And so that, in the counterpoint of that is the fear of life itself, that if I'm really looking at life in its true state, that life is not permanent, it's not forever, and inevitably death will occur at some point in that scale. We don't know when or where or how, but that fear of life, sometimes people get locked down or very in this, what we call, into a box of denial of not wanting to talk about death. So that fear of death. And this again ties into, as I mentioned just a moment ago, fear of one's mortality. So these are all very, very in-depth dynamics to explore and look upon. So let's move on to some more dynamics. Fear of hurting others. And again, talking about that fear of death, where people are very afraid many times of death because, well, if I died, it may hurt my significant other, it may hurt my family, and that in and of itself keeps people locked into this fear of death where, it may hurt others. And again, how do we look at things? We talked about perception in some of our earlier discussions. So perception is very powerful in how we confront and explore our particular fears. Fear of truth and reality. Now, death, they say there's two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. And again, the truth is that as one is born, one shall surely die. Now, again, that's a truth and that's a reality, but if you're holding a baby in your hands, that thought of exploring that concept that this child may die at some point in time is a very fear-based reality. So we'll continue on with our discussions of fears in future episodes, but again, reflect upon these and stay on that journey. Until we meet again, I wish all of you peace, unconditional love, and happiness.
If you are experiencing issues with today's topic and need professional guidance, contact us at 866-726-7881 or through our website, www.enlcinc.com.